Welcome back to another episode of Back and Forth with Blue Ridge Wealth Planners. My name is John Vandergriff. I am one of the owners and wealth planners here at Blue Ridge Wealth Planners. I am joined as always, by Zach Hill. Zach is our portfolio manager, our operations team lead, all-around good guy. He is currently not in the lead of our bracket.
No.
But,
not even close.
We'll see what happens. Crazy March Madness year this year, for those that haven't kept up with that. Doing a different example of what we're going to talk about today, which is another extension of our behavioral finance series. We're going to be talking about mental accounting. And so you may be mentally accounting your time, not toward March Madness, but that's not where we're going today. What we want to do, though, is obviously, as we've mentioned on each time that we've done the behavioral finance topic, my background is psychology, Zach's is finance, and so behavioral finance is the topic, and that's pretty good back and forth to have, I think. So we're going to be looking at mental accounting, which is something that we all do, and I think that, when we look at this, Zach and I had talked about this previously, a lot of the things that are going on in behavioral finance are things that you do. It's just putting a name to it. Mm-hmm. And so as we look at this, it's going to be talking about some healthy ways, unhealthy ways of using this, acknowledging that it is a real thing, but then also how it applies to very practical decisions that need to be made in financial planning. So...
Yeah, and I think it's, like you said, it's important it puts a real life perspective on a lot of things that are going on in academia of economics and finance, because that's really where this entire behavioral finance movement started and behavioral economics started, was because we've mentioned this before, but it's always worth mentioning again, is in economics, economics always assumes that every person behaves rationally 100% of the time. You make the best logical decision at all times, and you're always doing a cost-benefit analysis of everything you do. I mean, even down to the small decision of how much water to drink a day or anything like that. You're just making perfect decisions every time. And in reality, that's just not what happens ever. I mean, people... are people.
People are irrational a majority of the time.
Right, exactly. We very rarely behave in the best way from an economics perspective. So just what happened is really in the late 90s, Richard Thaler and some other economists that he worked with came alongside that and said, people don't behave rationally all the time, and we're going to try to explain that. And that's where you come in with the psychology perspective. Is they say, okay, if they don't behave rationally, why? What's going on here? And so that's how we got mental accounting. And so if you want to look at one of the most basic definitions of mental accounting, it's actually not bad at all. And I'll read it here. It says, mental accounting is the set of cognitive operations used by individuals and households to organize, evaluate, and keep track of financial activities. Right. That was the first definition that Thaler gave to mental accounting. And all that sounds pretty great. And so when you look at that, you're like, yes, mental accounting is just organizing things. That's not a bad thing at all, but there are some pitfalls to mental accounting, and there are some positives as well.
Yeah, and if you take it from the Investopedia definition, it probably puts more of a negative slant, and so we're going to look at the negative implications of it first, but then also the positive or more practical ways of doing it. So it says, mental accounting refers to different values a person places on the same amount of money based on subjective criteria, often with detrimental results. And so, what this does is it puts different weighting on the same amount of dollars depending on either how you come about getting them or what your intention is for using them. So like whether somebody keeps money in a bank account versus a stock portfolio, it's the same dollar. And like you had alluded to from an economist perspective, you look at it as, where it gives us the best benefit, not necessarily what is the most practical use of that said dollar. So as we look at that, there are some very good reasons to separate the two, depending on the outcome that you would like it to have. But then also there are some things that, not just from an investment perspective, but from a practical use, budgeting, all the things that come into kind of daily management of your financial situation that don't make a lot of logical sense, that I think this definition of mental accounting is more referring to.
Right.
So we use examples of this in some negative fashions where, the tax refund is a good example where this is effectively your money,
Right.
that you paid in too much to the government, and then they're holding it until you file your taxes and then giving it back to you. And so it is truly a refund, where some people will look at that as, oh man, this is free money that
Exactly.
I've never made or I've never had any allegiance to, and so I can take that money and use it foolishly.
Right. And I think it's the bonus fallacy, where people get this bonus and they think they can just spend it however they want. And we saw that right now we're sitting in the end of March, beginning of April. So a lot of people are starting to think about that tax refund and how they're going to spend it. And seems to be most common that people do not allocate that like they would a normal paycheck. Because when you are in your budgeting, if you use a software or a spreadsheet or even just the old pen and paper, whenever you look at that, you think, oh, this is all bonus money I can do. This is what I can use to book this vacation or do all these other things. When in reality, an economist's perspective would say, nope. You have to, if you save 10% of your biweekly paycheck or however you do that, you need to save 10% of this bonus check as well, or this tax refund, or this stimulus check. We just had stimulus checks go out. And so a lot of people are looking at this as fun money. And that's really not how an economist would allocate that money at all. They would, like you said, they would just, all money is created equally and all money should be allocated the exact same way every single time.
Right. And again, the goal when you do your taxes, and to kind of go and divert the path a little bit, is to try to get as close to zero as possible, because that way the dollars that you make stay in your pocket longer. And you don't pay a penalty for that. You just try to get that honed in where there's zero refund, and therefore you have more flexibility in use of those dollars, so that you're not giving a interest-free loan to the government for whatever period of time that you overpaid your taxes. Whether January 1 of the previous year, you're looking at 14, 15 months of money that's basically sitting there doing nothing. So as you look at that, it is in your best interest to try to get that to as much or as close to a net zero as possible, which we try to help people do with some tax planning. But then, like you said, that allows you to apply the same type of budgeting dynamics to these dollars. It's just you're not getting it in this lump of money that you neglected or forgot about. It's just hitting you every biweekly or paycheck that you get. So,
And from an economist's perspective, this is all bad. You don't want to do this. This is a very, very negative thing. But then you get into the human perspective. Yeah. And the real answer to this puzzle that we're solving here is, should all money be created equally like the economist says? For some people, the answer is absolutely yes.
Yeah.
For some people, they can afford to make concessions like using a stimulus money as a bonus check because they're so responsible with other parts of their money. So the answer to a lot of these questions and a lot of these things that we're proposing is what works for you. And I think that's important to think about too. But from an economist's perspective, it's all they consider it bad. Like you said, when you were reading the Investopedia definition, it seems to be universally negative here.
Yeah.
But there are some things that work, that can work for certain people. We saw that as we're speaking of bonus checks or stimulus checks or tax refunds, we saw that last summer when the first round of stimulus checks went out, a majority of people actually used this to pay down debt, and consumer credit scores got substantially better during the pandemic, and the personal savings rate went extremely higher. I mean, the personal savings rate in the U.S. has historically averaged between 5 and 10%, and that's really, we're looking at like 30 or 40 years, and then in the pandemic it went up to in the 30s. Yeah. And so as we look at that, we think like that actually is a good way that people have mentally accounted for things, but from an economist's perspective, this is all bad. They just, we should just be doing the same thing all the time. Yeah. But that's not practical.
Well, and two, the paradox that we look at between like a tax refund and a stimulus check. Tax refund is money that you should have had, but you're getting it back. A stimulus check is money that you would have made later, but they're giving it to you now. So it's kind of the opposite ends of the spectrum there.
Yeah.
But it's equally as negative if you blow it. It's going to cost most of us a lot more than $1,400 to pay back whatever we got from that. From a legislation past perspective. It's going to cost us a lot more than what we received out of it directly. Now, obviously, government programs and different things that went in place, but it's just one of those where it will be impactful, and it shouldn't be something that just it gets spent for no reason. So, as we look at that, I think a lot of the behavioral finance parts that we look at are trying to highlight things so that it can encourage more disciplined behavior.
Exactly.
And because again, if you're a disciplined person in the way that you handle your finances, like mental accounting is not a bad thing; it's a good thing. Confirmation bias is not a bad thing; it's a good thing when you're making good decisions.
Right.
So when you're making bad decisions, all of these are negative. So it
exactly
comes into how do you make decisions and what type of care do you make with those decisions, as far as, do you make decisions based on emotion? Do you make decisions based on logic? Do you make decisions based on future, or present needs, or so.
And the reality of this is, the reason that mental accounting exists is because traditionally humans make bad financial decisions. I mean, it's, if you're looking at the general population, I think it's over half of Americans don't have anything saved for retirement.
Yeah.
And so there are all kinds of stats that can really scare you into the financial future of individual people, because historically people have not behaved in their best financial interests. And so that's the reason that, as we say this, mental accounting can be good and can be bad. But historically it's been bad because, like we said, is if you're a good mental accountant and you don't, you budget everything in your head and you do a good job of it, then it works for you. But most people have to have a pretty strict budgeting regimen, and they have to, and they really need to treat all of these bonus, stimulus, tax refund checks as the same as their regular paycheck, because they're having, we've got to stay on track here. We've got to stay on track to meet these goals. And so the reason that this is pitched as we need to be aware and we need to start treating everything as the same is because automation seems to be one of the biggest tools to overcoming a lot of these behavioral biases. As we've talked about it before, with automated 401k enrollment has greatly impacted for the better the savings accounts and retirement accounts of American individuals.
Right.
As when that was unveiled and created by Richard Thaler to help this retirement savings crisis, that it was universally positive across the board. And so it's really all about automation. And so we can use mental accounting in good ways, but really it's highlighting and saying, we need to be automated here. You need to have this check that's coming in needs to go to the exact same allocations as every other check that you get.
Yeah, because I think one thing that we have told people and seen from a practical management of money is, we as human beings learn to live in whatever box we create for ourselves. So like, if you have X dollars of money coming in, you figure out how to make things work in that, or you change it to a box that you can work within.
Right.
You know what I mean? So when you look at a 401k, if that money never gets in that box, then you never spend it. And so it's about, how do we get more regimented to where we shrink that bucket of money that doesn't have a job, and it goes into kind of a Dave Ramsey envelopes principle, but hopefully with more encouragement than just a bunch of envelopes laying around doing nothing. It's how do I divide this money to where, yes, I still have all the things that I need, but I'm not foregoing the future for the present because I'm just undisciplined or don't have any way to separate the things. So I think that, as we talk about it, it can be very negative to prioritize certain things. And we've even talked about situations where, some aspects of mental accounting can be value buying, buying things that you don't need because it's on sale.
Right.
Is a poor and mismanaged way to handle finances. So if we are more disciplined in our budgetary needs, then you start to reach into, okay, well, how do I get more disciplined in the other areas of my life? Mm-hmm. Because I think more disciplined decisions lead to better decisions when it comes to, obviously, putting a name or a face to whatever you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And so, that leads into more of the practical side of financial planning where, as we look at somebody in retirement and preparing for that, what the big difference between that and the phase of life before that is not just, oh, I'm saving money and then now I'm not saving money. It goes a little deeper to what do you actually want this money to do? And so when you're in a position of prepping for your future and you're asking your 401k not to provide liquidity because you're penalized to touch the money. You're not asking it to provide income because you've got a job. You're asking it to basically grow and try to find the best pieces that give you the growth you need for the time that you have before you need something else from it. And then as you get into retirement, because of the lack of pensions, because Social Security makes up a very small percentage of a lot of people's income, the jobs that you need this savings bucket to do need to be separated in a mental accounting function just so that you're using them properly.
Right. And that's exactly what we get into is the positives when you use it in the right way, and especially having a financial professional that can help you use it in the right way are the things where it really starts to make a lot of sense, because you start to take out the mental aspect and it becomes just accounting, because accounting for your finances is very good and everybody needs to do that.
Yeah.
It's when the human behavior gets in there and the mental side of mental accounting kicks in that it gets bad. So if you can take and having another person, like I said, a financial professional or somebody to walk alongside you to take that emotion out of it and just do that, you can start to allocate things. And we've talked about this a lot on, whether it's risk buckets or how you want to do lifestyle or goals or whatever the planning style it is, then you start to think about these things in a completely different way, because it's not, it's not money you're coming in and trying to allocate. This is my retirement and this is the money that I'm going to use for my life, and how do I actually use this money now effectively and efficiently during retirement?
Yeah, because I think if we were, and you can tell me from your perspective if this is correct or not, but the danger that exists today for the average person entering retirement is planning on taking a consistent income from a high growth instrument.
Oh, it's going to be extremely tough right now. We talk about it all the time. I mean, like you said, it has to be a high growth instrument because your bonds are making zero. Retirees right now can rely on interest payments between 0 and 1%.
Right, as far as the consistent part. So it's, and again, purely inside of a 401k structure where you're just limited to stocks and bonds. But a lot of people take those traditional investments, even though they have the flexibility to do something else outside of their 401k, and just kind of stick to what they're used to,
right.
Either because financial professional you use limits the portfolios they use to just that, or you don't know what else to use and you just go and use what you've always used.
Right.
And so as you look at that, the only way someone in retirement should have a majority, if not all of their money in the stock market is if you either need nothing from your investments at all, or you are willing to take out withdrawals as inconsistently as your production is from your investment.
Yeah, because that's that's the most volatile asset that most people will invest in their lifetime.
And that's why so many people get in bad situations in retirement, is because they don't know the separation and the diversification, not just of different investments, but different jobs that you need your money to do.
Yeah.
And why that makes sense when you're in a new phase of life, because there are investments out there today that provide income that is consistent. Mm-hmm. And if you need consistent income, those are a match. There are investments that provide high growth over long periods of time. And if you need high growth over long periods of time for a portion of your money, hey, match those up.
Right.
If you need liquidity, you better find some things that keep your money liquid. And it's just the more jobs that we ask one asset class to do, the worse it does.
Exactly. And that's why you need to start, and you hear it, diversification all the time. Well, you can kind of pair up diversification and mental accounting here.
Yeah.
Because you have all of these different things working for one common goal, but a lot of different things that are working, together to meet that goal, but they just have different goals within themselves. So we start to break it down and go a little bit further here.
Well, and I think the thing that most investors need to do is they need to realize the mental side of that diversification, right. Where, the stock portfolio that you have is needed, but it's very defined in what you need to use it for. And too many times people say, well, I want more growth than anything else, and that's going to fix all that goes wrong. And again, if it consistently grows and never goes down, that's good. But that,
I was looking at this, as we were talking about it, I was looking at this because I was thinking, if you're asking yourself to take income out of a stock portfolio, that is not good. That's not a match. We need to do some mental accounting and real accounting and pull, income needs somewhere else, because as we saw 1 year ago, some of the one-day returns on March 12th, 2020, the S&P 500 lost 9.5%. On March 16th, 2020, the S&P 500 lost 11.98%. And so you're looking at that. I mean, on one day, the S&P 500 was down 12%.
Yeah.
You cannot be looking for income out of that because, like you said, that's just not consistent at all. Now, there's some positives from a year ago, too, but it's all over the board. We're looking at massive up and down swings, and if you're just trying to get steady, stable income, this is not a place to look for that. And so having another bucket that can do something that provides that income is something that's very important, and we talk about that a lot, but we just haven't termed it as mental accounting.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. No, and so... Again, the key, as we look at it, will be, just identifying what is it that I want my investments to do, and then kind of segmenting, or we use buckets as a way to do that, but putting your money in those buckets that corresponds to what you want your money to do.
Right.
And if you don't know what you want your money to do, that's job number one. And then you need somebody to show you other options that can provide that, because there are more than just stocks, bonds, and cash to work with today.
Exactly. And if you're getting, if you want to introduce, let's say you're taking your income from a fixed index annuity, that's great. And you have a steady, stable, consistent income out of that. Then when the stock market drops 30%, you're not tempted to go in there and sell it because you need income. You're like, nope, this is the portion of my portfolio that I knew had a potential to lose 30 or 40%, and I just have to hold it. And my overall financial plan isn't disrupted because I've been getting income from this annuity or this other investment that I wanted to start taking withdrawals from, and that's what that was for.
Yeah, and again, as you go into that example, the important part is not just saying, okay, well, I need 5 different things for my money, so that means I need 20% in each one. Right. You've got to properly weight it to where if it takes 60% of your money to provide good, consistent income, you better position 60% of your portfolio toward things that do that job only.
Exactly.
And then that gives you 40% of your money that's now flexible to be used for some of these other jobs, depending on what you need from a liquidity or future growth perspective.
And it can be a very stark mindset shift. I mean, even we talk about this every day, but as somebody who is younger and has, potentially 30, 40 years until retirement, I am in the stocks only mindset. That my money's got one goal, and it's to grow, but I'm trying to put myself in the retiree shoes, going from, oh, this is my 401k and I want it to grow, to, oh, I need income from this, is a lot. It's a very hard shift to make, and it's very tough to walk through that transition. And so as we walk through that transition, your money goes from having one goal to potentially 4, 5, 6 goals. You've got to split that up, and that mindset shift is why all of these behavioral biases exist, because it actually is just really tough to watch that money that you've worked for maybe 50 years for, and then start to take that you start to watch that balance fall, and it's falling for a good reason, but start to it's the exact opposite of what you were just doing for the last 40 or 50 years.
Well, and I think too, sometimes mental accounting, the decisions that we struggle with in life are trained behaviors that we've taught ourselves to do. So like you're fighting against the previous version of yourself that has been training for decades of, don't worry about what this account says now.
Right.
I'm not needing this money today. Well, guess what? You're at the time you need it now. And so it's got to be a mindset shift to say, okay, I'm happy with this return. I'm happy with this value. And as we tell people, you hear a lot of people say, oh, it's not a loss until you realize it. Well, it's also not a gain until you realize it either.
Right.
So as you look at it, you've got to make sure that you keep the values at a level, and again, expose in the market the appropriate amount. We're not saying get all out of the market. It's just you better make sure you keep that number relevant to what your needs are from this bucket. And if you don't need anything from your bucket, you got as much flexibility to invest that anywhere as you'd like to. But it's in the same way we go through budgeting your income out on a kind of pre-retirement standpoint to make sure you have enough to pay for groceries, utilities, all these different things. you better budget out the way you invest your money so that you can be in a position to account for all the different things that you need this money to do, but also recognize what you're asking that money to do, and not be disappointed with the lack of production that you've got.
Right.
Because it is one of those conversations that we do have, and I know from my seat, I would rather explain why we didn't make more money for a client than apologize for losing too much at the wrong time. I
Right.
mean, it's all returning back to a focus on, if we keep our focus on what we need our money to do, then that helps us make decisions in the right frame of mind.
And so many of these conversations that we have on the podcast always come back to risk tolerance, and it's finding out, and finding out what your true risk tolerance is. Because, like you said, you don't want to explain why we lost too much money, because that means that we weren't in the right risk category.
Yep.
And so finding that true risk tolerance for not only an individual, but also all of these individual buckets of money as well. And so it's just every time we talk about this, I'm just thinking so much of this revolves around risk and how much and what your risk appetite is, what if you're allocating risk correctly in a portfolio, and all those different things. It always comes back to risk.
Yep. So, as you look at it, hopefully this discussion has been enlightening to you from the aspect of mental accounting is something that we do. The way that we take advantage of that is add discipline into the decisions that we're looking at making, both from what are we doing with the month-to-month income that we have coming in, but also how do we make sure that our investments are reflecting the current needs that we have, or future needs too, because we always got to balance current versus future in that equation. But I think the more things that we're asking our money to do, the more complex or diverse we need to make our investments, and not just because it needs to be complicated. It's just because the three things that everybody's looking for today is safety on your money, growth, and access. Problem is you can't get all three of those in one place. So as we look at that, you've got to build something that allows you to have those three, but also the derivatives of those three, which may be, consistent income, inflation protection, all the different things that we try to go about creating a plan for. But if we do it in a way where we understand and link our mind to what these things can do, then that helps us build something that's actually productive, and we can anchor ourselves to that.
Right.
And kind of make decisions in that context, I guess. So anything else to add before we wrap up here?
No, I think that's a pretty good summary. And I think you hit the nail on the head, where it's all about being aware that this exists and how to use it, and take the mental part out of the mental accounting and try to be as objective as you can while still using the tools that you can from mental accounting.
Yep. Well, good deal. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this. We'll have another installment of behavioral finance in one of our podcasts, but it'll be, I don't know, whichever number is coming up next. But thank you guys for joining us today. Hopefully you learned some things. We look forward to going back and forth on another topic. But until then, be good stewards of your money, not just for our sakes, but so you don't blow your stimulus and tax refunds until we talk again. So that's all. Back and forth with Blue Ridge Wealth Planners.
Investment advisory services offered through Blue Ridge Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor. Securities offered through Madison Avenue Securities, LLC, member FINRA, SIPC, MAS, and Blue Ridge Wealth Planners are not affiliated companies.